Welcome to Bridging the Gap Law, Therapy, and Justice.
Hey, everybody. Welcome into an all new episode of Bridging the Gap Law, Therapy, and Justice with attorney and licensed marriage and family therapist Caitlin Burgess. I'm your host, Mike Leon. Caitlin here, she practices across the intersection of law and mental health, helping families, attorneys, and courts find clarity and resolution in high conflict situations. And in today's episode, we're going to be talking about what happens when a child resists or refuses contact with a parent after a divorce or a separation. Caitlin's going to help us understand where those patterns come from, how professionals assess them, and what families can do to support the healing process. Caitlin, it's good to see you. And before we dive into this subject matter, I would love for you to explain resist refuse dynamics. And I'm using air quotes around that, around what that means for families and professionals who may be new to this terminology.
Certainly. Thank you so much, Mike, for having me today. So, resist refuse dynamics in family law matters typically refer to cases where a child is resisting or refusing contact with a parent post separation or divorce. So, resist refuse dynamics are also sometimes commonly referred to cases with parent child contact problems.
So, when a child begins resisting time with a parent, what are some of the most common circumstances that kind of lead to that situation?
The best practices are really to look at these cases from a multifactorial approach. So, what that means is we look at the entire family system and we don't assume that there's just one cause of the resistance. For example, we come into these cases and we don't assume, oh, this must be a case where one parent is alienating the child against another parent, or this must be a case where a child is realistically estranged from a parent and that's the only cause. What we would like to do is we look at the entire family system. It's called taking a family systemic perspective. So looking at a multifactorial model, you would generate certain hypotheses. Is there parental neglect, abuse, or substance abuse in that household that has caused the child to realistically reject a parent? Are there other factors that are possibly involved? Are there some negative influencing? Is this a high conflict case where a child has decided to align with one parent because perhaps that eases the child's stress, or perhaps that makes the child feel as if they're protecting the other parent. So we want to look at these cases from a family systems perspective and generate hypotheses regarding multiple causes for this resistance.
Caitlin, in the intro, I mentioned you're a therapist. So, from a therapist standpoint, what kind of emotions or fears might drive some of that resistance in children, especially ones across the age spectrum?
For adolescents, for example, sometimes we have a parent who's very permissive. Let's say the father example, for example, in a case is extremely permissive and gives that adolescent whatever they want, whereas the other parent, hypothetically the mother, is enforcing rules and boundaries. So a teenager would naturally, all other things considered, want to be with a parent that's permissive. Or we could have very young children who are perhaps experiencing separation anxiety with their primary attachment and are very, very anxious about being separated from that parent. And the high conflict exacerbates that. So, fear, anxiety, and as I said before, there can be genuine abuse that the child has experienced, or there can be a loyalty bind, or even negative influencing, either consciously or unconsciously, by one parent against the other.
So, Caitlin, how then do we begin to distinguish, or how do you begin to distinguish, I should say, between the child's natural reaction to the situation and maybe a more serious pattern that's going to involve the court?
It's natural for kids, especially when you start developing, the children start developing into adolescence, to have arguments with their parents, or to have something occur in a household that makes the child sad. And so there's going to be some temporary resistance or reluctance. So that's developmentally normal, developmentally appropriate, Mike. But when we get into a situation where there is a pattern that's becoming more and more entrenched, those are cases where we want to differentiate and say, hey, this is developing into a case with parent child contact problems. And in that situation, it's helpful for the court often to step in and order family therapy so we can ameliorate some of the dynamics that are causing this resistance and help the child have a healthier relationship with both parents in a very child focused, child centric manner.
I want to get back onto the child stuff in just a second, but I wanted to ask you what tends to help some of these parents or even the attorneys that are unsure about a child's resistance, if it's maybe rooted in, let's say, anxiety or potential alienation. Like, what tends to help in those situations?
Yeah, that's a great question. So here in California, we uh, have a process called a forensic evaluation, and that is implemented. It's usually called a 730 evaluation, 730 evidence code 730 expert. Sometimes they're ordered under different family law code provisions, such as Family Law Code 3111 or Section 3118. Regardless, these are child centered forensic evaluations where a forensic evaluator who is properly qualified. So, here in California, you have to be a licensed mental health professional or a doctor with specialized training, advanced training in child custody and domestic violence dynamics. So, that individual can be appointed by the court, step in, and look at a data set. That individual is a neutral. So they can look at the data, they can interview the mother, they can interview the father. If it's a same sex partnership, of course, it would be a mother and a mother, or father, whatever variation there. Regardless, they look at both parents because it's generally two parents, and they have interviews, and then they do home observations. They look at school records, they look at psychiatric records, they could look at other mental health records, speak with other neutrals that have been involved in the case, such as parenting coordinators or minors councils, and make a determination as to what is the cause of the child's resistance to the parent. And then we can therefore tailor our interventions appropriately after that evaluation is complete.
As you're talking, Kaylin, I can think to myself that these cases probably become so polarized so quickly because of what's involved in the emotions. How do you keep the focus on the child and his experience, his or her experience, rather than the blame or the assumptions about the parents?
Yeah, so you're right. They become extremely polarized, and they often become polarized even among the professionals, such as the lawyers involved, or even the therapists for the children are adopting a certain narrative. And so it's important that we all come together and focus on the best interests of the child. And so the child's experience is important. Helping the child feel comfortable is important. And another thing that's really, really important, Mike, in these types of cases is to have very detailed court orders. We don't want the court orders to be ambiguous. We want them to be detailed. For example, what are the specific therapeutic goals if there's going to be therapy? What are the visitation times? What is, if it's a step up plan, often in these cases we'll have a step up towards a certain amount of custody. And so you want the court orders to be very detailed because they serve as a guide for all the professionals and as a benchmark for example, the family therapist to guide the family therapist in their work with the family.
So, speaking of court orders, let's say the court now has ordered therapy in one of these resist refuse cases. Take us through that process. What does it look like from beginning to end?
Yeah, thanks for bringing this question up, Mike. So, I do a lot of court appointed or court involved family therapy when there are parent child contact problems. So, in a best case scenario, we have a very detailed court order implementing or articulating what the treatment goals are, but also best practices involve working collaboratively in a team based approach. So we would have a parent coordinator or a case manager who would oversee the process. We would have the individual therapists for the case. We would have possibly parent coaches for each of the parents, and then we would have the family therapist. And that type of cohesive collaboration prevents polarization, which can happen in these cases. And the team based approach can be very effective with the case manager, of course, overseeing the whole thing to make sure that it's running smoothly.
And Caitlin, collaboration, as you just mentioned, is kind of key, especially between all of the moving pieces of the therapist, the attorneys, and the court. What other approaches have you found help keep everyone kind of on the same page and aligned around, hey, this is about the child's best interest?
What other approaches? Well, we talked about having a detailed court order. Uh, I think the therapeutic intervention, having working with parent coaches that are helping the parents keep the focus on the child, having a family therapist with the same child centered focus. And then releases, like I like to get releases of information because often the therapeutic process is confidential. So if I'm able to speak with the attorneys and help them keep the conflict down so that we keep our eye on the ball and know this is about the child and not mom winning, not dad losing, not one parent winning, one parent losing. It's not about the fight between the parents. It's about helping that child have a more nuanced, often more flexible approach to a parent. Forgiveness is an important part, understanding a forgiveness educational model, what the benefits of forgiveness are, and just really staying centered and helping the child feel safe during the process and having everyone come together and work collaboratively rather than having this polarization, which happens so often in these cases.
Yeah, it's very well said. And Caitlin, as we wrap here on this episode, looking at all of your years of experience doing this with all these families over time, what has helped a child start rebuilding that connection or security, even if there's a chance that full reconciliation isn't yet possible? What has helped a child in your experience?
Yeah, so I think sometimes in family therapy with parent child contact problems, everyone is so focused on the ultimate end goal, which is reunifying the child with the rejected parent. But there are other really positive outcomes that can come about from therapy, even though we may not reach that ultimate goal. So the child can develop more nuanced views of their parents, more flexible views. They can develop more flexible thinking. They can develop more positive coping mechanisms to deal with anxiety. The rejected parent can have develop better parenting skills, and so can the favored parent. And perhaps the parents themselves can work better with one another in co parenting the child because the conflict can really be a driving force in these types of cases for the child to reject a parent. So if the conflict is taken down a few decibels, then we can see better outcomes. So those would be some goals apart from a major end goal or a primary goal of reconnection between a rejected parent and a child.
Caitlin, thank you for the time and insights on this subject matter. We truly appreciate it.
Sure, and it was wonderful talking to you, Mike. Thank you.
And that's it for today's episode of Bridging the Gap Law, Therapy, and Justice with Caitlin Burgess. To learn more about Caitlin's interdisciplinary work, bridging therapy, and the law, do me a favor, visit CaitlinBurgess.com. You're going to find all the resources for families, attorneys, mental health professionals that are navigating all these complex and high conflict cases. Thank you to everybody for listening to this episode, but don't forget, like, subscribe, leave a review and comment, or share it with someone who needs to hear it. As always, I'm Mike Leon. We'll see everybody next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.